All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the July 23rd, 2020 Watertown Plan Commission. Get a roll call.
Oletsky,
Present.
Brink,
Here.
Dolly,
Here.
Spire,
Here.
Dargits Johnson,
Here.
Ford,
Here.
and Hanson, Culhane, and Kays are absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Brandy. Item 3 on the agenda is invitation for public comment participant submittal. We'll have a spot later in the agenda for you to speak on an item that wasn't on the agenda if you so choose. Moving on to item 4 on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. We'll need a motion.
I'll make that motion to approve the agenda.
I have a motion. Do you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the agenda before we take a vote? Okay, we'll do a roll call.
Oletsky,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Spire,
Yes.
Dargits Johnson,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Thank you. The agenda is approved. Moving on to item 5 is the approval of the minutes. First set of minutes is from the March 19th, 2020.
I'll move to approve.
A motion
I'll second that.
and a second. Any discussion on those minutes? Take a vote.
Oletsky,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Spire,
Yes.
Dargits Johnson,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
All right, those minutes are approved. We'll move on to the minutes from the July 9th, 2020 meeting.
I'll make that motion to approve the minutes.
You have a motion.
Ford seconds.
Second by Ford. Any discussion on those minutes? Take a vote.
Oletsky,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Spire,
Yes.
Dargits Johnson,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item 6A on the agenda, resolution number 2020-25.
Yes, thank you, Blake. So this is commission consideration of resolution number 2020-25, approving the vacation of a portion of public right-of-way for an alley abutting the east side of the County Fair Banquet Hall. So I'll pull up GIS here. And so this is the property of the County Fair Banquet Hall. And we'll go to show you guys the area. It's just what is directly east. So this application is through the Gambers who currently own it, and then the city also, as the other side of the alley, did sign off on the petition after council approval. The council wasn't approving the vacation, they were just approving the mayor, they were authorizing the mayor to sign to bring it forward. Because when you do a vacation, you need all abutting landowners to sign off on it before it can come forward. And so this is approximately 0.05 acres that will be vacated. Access will not be restricted by this vacation. You'll see the east-west alley, the 20-foot alley, and this might be easier. So this alley will remain a through alley. This is a 10-foot alley currently, and then it will remain to the south, and that's 20 feet as well. There are some garage doors, and then there's some doors on the backside of these buildings to leave it public. I think that there could be further discussion on if we want to retain that south alley or not, but that's not part of this petition.
To retain which alley? That 10-foot alley?
Yeah,
Or
or the southern portion.
That leads to Kemp Avenue.
Yeah,
Okay.
but right now that's not part of it. That'll kind of be, you know, when they get further in the design of the downtown park. So I think with that, that's it.
I see on the site plan too, there was a previously vacated alley to the east of this one, running east-west as well.
Yes.
And is that on the portion of the land that's the city property?
Yep. And then to note, in the resolution, you'll see that we are retaining a utility easement over this vacated property because there are still the Watertown Municipal Utilities and there are private utility companies that have infrastructure in there. So that'll need to be worked out.
Does that easement cover the entire portion of the alley?
Yep.
So, he's not going to build into the alley, it's just so people aren't going beside it.
I think eventually he would like to. If it really came down to it and the lines couldn't be moved, it would just be probably green space. If you want to say anything. Don't want to talk for him, he's here.
Yeah, right now the plan is that we would build into the alley, if it can be worked out. That again has to be approved by the city because they would, if this was vacated, then the city would own 10 feet of it, and the Gambers or myself, when I close on the property, would own 10 feet of it. And the intention would be the Gambers are intending to lease back the commercial spaces on both the east end and the west end of the new project. And to incorporate the commercial spaces that they want to have on both of those, we would want to build into that alley if it made sense. And we've talked to Watertown Municipal Utilities and the city in regards to that, so.
And the utilities are fine with them, with that?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just for further clarification and discussion with the existing utilities and any potential future building in the alleyway, if Mr. Craig's development were to extend into the vacated alley, assuming this vacation is approved, he would have to work with the utility companies to relocate, realign, and reestablish any easements that are necessary to cover those existing utilities in order to accommodate his development. But as is, where is, we would secure the proper easements for those utilities at this time, and of course, those couldn't be impeded by any structures until the aforementioned relocations were accomplished.
And that would be the applicant's responsibility in that regards.
Absolutely.
To be clear, though, you said the utility easements are not being vacated, so the entire 20 feet will be covered by utility easement
Yep.
until the easement is vacated
Yep.
at a further action in the future.
Yep. Yeah, so right now it's just the right of way, but we are retaining an easement over the entirety of the vacated alley.
So what's the process to if it comes to that, to eliminate the easement,
Well,
vacate the easement?
if when they're used, then you would have to vacate it, but if we were relocating them, couldn't we do that by replat?
You still have to vacate the easement. It's a public utility easement. There's a vacation process, which is just like the street vacation process, same process.
So I should apply for that as soon as I know.
Well, you gotta know, that's the thing.
That's why we're at.
Yeah.
We were working on language too for easement and right of way vacations, and I did some research on it. It's just something that needs to come through. But how our process is today, yeah, that it would be a vacation.
Okay.
This is Ford. I'm a little unfamiliar with the vacation process. So if this vacation is approved, then this property no longer belongs to the city. It belongs to these property owners. Is that correct?
Well, and right now, how a vacation works is then half of the right of way, they go back to the parent parcel. So it would be split. Half would go back to the county fair banquet hall, half would go to the city. We are in discussions with if the city, and the city council will have to determine if they want to convey their half to the property owner for this project, if it's a benefit. If the city doesn't need it, then if we don't need that 10 feet. But city council will have to determine that.
But the simple answer to the question is the vacated right-of-way gets split 50-50, half to the east adjacent landowner, half to the west adjacent landowner.
So is it just given to them or is it sold to the adjacent landowner?
The vacate just relinquishes our public right-of-way to that adjacent landowner to the west.
All right.
And then it goes back on the tax roll.
And as a matter of process for the vacation, we have the public hearing here as a board, but then it proceeds on to the city council for additional public hearing and final action.
That's correct.
So this is kind of an interesting one where the city council has already at least had a look at this to authorize it to come first to the board on behalf of the city, but then they'll get the ultimate say after we take any action today.
Yep.
And just to be clear, what the Gambers are planning on doing on the east side is going to be something that would benefit or be in conjunction with the new downtown park. So I think that's you know, and we're trying to work with infrastructure and things like that as far as making sure the walkability and bend paths and stuff like that would also correspond to this improvement.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Open the public hearing if there's anybody else to speak on behalf or against this proposal. Any public comments? With none, I'll close the public hearing. And we'll need a motion for commission action.
Motion to approve.
A motion to approve by Brink.
I'll second that.
And a second. Additional discussion on this item? Additional questions from the board, comments?
When I look at, when we vacate alleys, I look at if they're through or not. You know, and when they're already not through, I mean, this one doesn't go all the way through, north and south as is. I feel like when we're vacating, we're not hindering the flow of traffic that way. I mean, that's something that I always try to look at when vacations, come before us. So that's just one thing I want to note.
Any other comments before we take a vote? Okay, roll call.
Oletzky,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Spire,
Yes.
Dargis Johnson,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
And motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to item 6B on the agenda. We've got two actions on this one. It looks like resolution 2020-33 and 34.
Yep. Okay, so, and when I describe them, I'll just describe them once like we usually do with annexation and zonings, and then as Blake said, you'll take two separate action. So this is the annexation and zoning of a portion of Dakota Commons Edition, which is southeast of 3rd Avenue, and, the east of 19th Street Northeast. This is for commission approval of resolution number 2020-33, initiating annexation of attractive land contiguous to the city of Watertown. And the second action item will be commission approval of resolution number 2020-34, establishing the zoning designation of PUD, planned unit development, for this area. And also, if you guys recall, we recently amended our PUD ordinance. So, and that was in February of this year. So they utilized this going forward. Dakota Commons originated, I believe, in, 1999?
2003.
Okay, 2003. So they brought in the first portion, which is for the most part built out. And so then now they're moving on further into their master plan. They originally have a master plan for this entire area. Now they're just moving farther to the east to free up some additional, or to create some additional lots. So that is why they're coming before the board to move forward with annexing and zoning. And then with the annexation and zoning, because it's a PUD, they submitted the PUD plan explaining why they needed a unique zoning district, which is the same concept that they've used in the past. So basically what makes Dakota Commons different and unique is the setbacks. So they do have lesser setbacks because they form a cluster. They have like a cluster development in cul-de-sacs, and then they have open space with recreational trails in lieu of sidewalk in the front. So, and then also smaller street sections to keep it, that controls traffic. It gives the neighborhood feel, which I think is what a lot of people like about Dakota Commons. And so that's basically in this PUD plan what they're asking for in the annexation and zoning. And then they still, once this would be done, they would still submit a preliminary plan, which then we would look at all of the technical engineering a little deeper. But this was the route that we wanted to take when we were reviewing PUDs, so that we knew up front what they were asking for.
And so with the preliminary plan, we would get into things like the infrastructure, the street sections, the road widths,
Drainage.
drainage.
Yep.
But right now, the actions for the board is strictly on the annexation and zoning for the PUD district.
Yep. And so then that, and we have, you know, for the PUD plan, we do say 1 through 6, the things that they need to show. They have shown all of that. And so this is basically, the PUD, they're creating their own zoning district. And so then, as long as it's a benefit, then the city can approve what they're proposing for the PUD.
Thank you, Brandy. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing on this, and we'll take the public hearing for both items, and then we'll act on each resolution individually. If anybody's here to speak on behalf or against? Yep, go ahead and state your name for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is John Mills, and I represent Dakota Commons. As was said in the introductory comments, we started in 2003, and we began with a master plan of how we wanted to develop this entire area. And so we're here trying to continue. We're on that same program, on that same plan. We're just trying to continue with it. We've got some new construction out there. We have some new interest, more activity, and so we're enthused about that. We have some existing street that currently is not even annexed yet into the city, so we know if we get this annexation, we'll be able to list and sell some additional lots quickly and get some more development going out at Dakota Commons. I guess with that, I'm here to answer any questions. Along with me, I have another person from my office, and we also have our engineer here. So I think we got the team. If there's a question you have, I'm sure we have the answer. So glad to be here and looking forward to proceeding with asking for a favorable vote on both the annexation and the PUD. That's a critical part of this, is that PUD designation. It's a part of that master plan that we've been working with, so we're hopeful that that will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. I do have a question as it relates to the phasing structure that's shown on the plan and how that correlates to the actions that have been taken on the annexation. So, you know, I see some of the phases are partially annexed already in Zone PUD, while some of it is before us today in this resolution. Why don't those line up as far as what's being annexed in and the phasing? So you'd mentioned, you know, for instance, that you've got some street already out there that's not annexed in.
Correct.
In the past, why have we not annexed in association with the phasing that you're doing?
I actually can't answer that question, why the annexation didn't happen. It actually was a surprise to us. We came to plat additional lots, and were alerted to the fact that we needed to annex the property first. And so maybe the cart got a little ahead of the horse, and I don't know how that happened for sure. But the most recent road construction out there, I think, was in 2014.
Okay.
So it's been a number of years ago. Like I say, we thought that it was in the city and we could just plat, and were alerted that it was not. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess in either case, the way that it looks now with the section that's being proposed for annexation and zoning, it will have a nice cutoff from a development standpoint, although it does look like it goes partially through a couple of the lots on the southern side there. But otherwise, it's a pretty clean transition.
Yeah, so when they plat, they won't be able to plat these two lots. And that they just ran adjacent to what they have existing.
Yeah, which does line up, I guess, you know, the southern section of that cul-de-sac that's just to the west of there.
Yeah, because if you guys remember too, we just recently had Dakota Commons 7th edition. And then that was because they still had two lots that were completely annexed that they could plat. And then they had that cutoff again. And it's just how it lays out with, I mean, do we jog the annexation and zoning, or do we just wait on the plat? So.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
And the most likely development would be that those next couple of cul-de-sacs, I think the one is identified as Big Stone Circle, probably an extension of Lewis and Clark Trail, and then a connection with Parkview Trail and that smaller cul-de-sac to the north there that I can't read the name of right now, but they all have South Dakota Park names.
Spruce Hill, I think.
Yeah, and so those are, all of those areas that would be in our next actual physical development would fall within the annexation that we either already have or that we're asking for today.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Brandy, sorry if I missed it, but the 1 through 6 is required for preliminary plan. Did you touch on that? Was that put up on the screen as well?
I did not put it on the screen. Did I have that in the packet? Just for the PUD
plat, sorry.
Yeah, I did. I mentioned how that's what they have to address. I just didn't pull it up.
Since that's a change to the ordinance and how we modified what the PUD plans entail, I just wanted to bring that up for informational purposes so that, because it's something new in our processes.
You guys remember from February, right? I'll pull
Refresher
it up
would be
here.
good.
Oh, yeah. Understandable.
But there's still a preliminary plan coming, which is new for the PUD. Didn't used to have that step. It was different. So this is like a concept.
Yeah. Yep. And then, so it's at least, so then you have something to look at as far as the zoning goes when they come in for annexation and zoning.
Could you zoom that in a little bit so it's
Yep.
easier to see?
So the lot layout and all of that will be in the preliminary plan.
Yep.
And so what we're seeing here from a lot layout, a road layout, road connections, we're not locked into the plan at this point. It would be reviewed in more detail during the preliminary plan phase.
Mm-hmm.
And those are some of the big components and why I wanted to bring up the 1 through 6, because those would be most specifically have checked off in the next step of the process with the preliminary plan.
Yep. And then the main points to really look into as far as what they're asking for the zoning is they gave a nice summary of what Dakota Commons is and what they're asking for as far as the zoning goes. So it's the setbacks, and then they are somewhat as far as the street section, except we still, there's still that more so comes during the preliminary plan phase when you're looking at the engineering design standards and how it fits into that. And then also the recreational trail in lieu of the sidewalks is also a large part of what this PUD is approving.
Is that approved with the zoning or with the preliminary plan? And the lot layout, theoretically, they didn't need to show that on the zoning,
Mm-hmm.
the plan. But they have, but that doesn't mean that what they're approving, what the Plan Commission is approving, is not necessarily approving the lot layout. That comes with the preliminary plan. And the management of the drainage, just in general, the traffic, those things are to be shown. And they've shown a lot of detail here, probably more than they had to. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, but I don't think that's what you're approving
Yeah.
necessarily.
And yeah, something, to really pay attention to as well is what they inside their PUD, they also designate R1 single family, where you can put a single family home versus a duplex or a multifamily use. So they do hold true to that in this, even though it's a PUD.
And it's consistent with what the previous development at Dakota Commons has been doing.
Yep.
Okay. We do have the public hearing open if there's anybody else to speak on behalf or against either the annexation or the zoning. don't see anybody in the room. Anybody on the Teams meeting? Was that something? I heard a noise.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think so.
With no additional public comments, we'll close the public hearing, and we have 2 actions in front of us then.
I move to approve the annexation.
We have a motion for approval of the annexation,
I'll second that.
and a second. Any additional discussion on the annexation? We'll take a vote, please.
Bilotsky,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes.
Spire,
Yes.
Dargis Johnson,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes,
Annexation's approved. Moving on to the zoning. We'll need an action.
I would like to make a motion to approve the zoning designation of PUD for this resolution.
Thank you, Bonnie. Do we have a second? I have a second by Dargis Johnson. Any additional discussion on the zoning?
I just was gonna ask staff, so the setbacks of 25 feet for the front, 7 yard for the side and 15 for the rear, that is the same as what the existing or adjacent PUD is, correct?
Yep,
Okay, I just wanna make sure that this PUD is the same as the PUD next to it, it's not different.
yep, they kept it consistent.
Perfect. Any additional comments from the board? We'll take a roll call vote.
Bilotsky,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes?
Spire,
Yes.
Dargis Johnson,
Yes.
Ford.
yes.
All right, motion is approved. Moving on to item 7 on the agenda is open public comments. If anybody's here to speak on something that wasn't on the agenda? Anybody? No, we'll move on to item 7, new business.
Okay, thank you, Blake. And so this was added just at the 11th hour, just to try to get, I wanted to get it to you guys so you could start reviewing it and get some eyes on it. It still needs internal vetting as well, but this is a proposal that came from the Development Task Force Group, which is a combination of city staff, the Watertown Development Company, city council, and then realtors, developers, engineers, just a group that has been looking into the our subdivision ordinance and just development in general and ways that we can create more efficiencies. So this is the first task that we bid off, and this is just for chapter 2406, which is the procedure for subdivision. So it goes through the concept plan, the preliminary plan, the construction plan, and the plat. And basically, what this is doing is, so it would change at what point the plan commission or the public body is seeing a subdivision. So instead of you guys seeing it at the preliminary plan phase, which the developer has already incurred a lot of cost and it's kind of been determined on where things are going as far as their infrastructure, streets, lot layout, detention ponds, everything. So we wanted to get it in front of the public as soon as we could if things needed to change, to help, the public can have a little more input, and then also the developer isn't misled by staff. Because right now, we have the DRT, which is the design review team, and that is with a combination of staff. And so then we give that a rubber stamp approval, and then they move on to the preliminary plan, which then is also vetted again through the DRT, and then inevitably brought to the Plan Commission. And then City Council doesn't see any of that until it gets to a rezone, most likely, or a plat. But, so it's just kind of, we want to get eyes on it earlier on in the process. And so then that's what this is explaining on who is seeing the concept plan, who is approving it, what the effective period for the concept plan, what that looks like. And then for the preliminary plan, then that would be reviewed just through staff and the DRT team, the design review team. And then, so it would be that step, they'd have the prelim plan, and then as far as, then if they were ready to do a rezone or a plat, but it would be in conformance to what was approved by the plan commission for the concept plan. And then they would just take a deeper step into all the technical engineering that would need to take place. That would also follow our engineering design standards, as well as our manuals for post-construction stormwater, which for detention ponds and drainage, which sometimes it's, you know, that'll be for then the staff, the engineers to review and make sure it's meeting all of those requirements. But we think that it might be more beneficial for you guys to see it when it's conceptual, where we can manipulate it a little bit before it being too set in stone and too much analysis already being done. And then so then also you'll notice in the preliminary plan phase, it looks like, well, I completely struck the drainage and grading plan information that we look at currently, because I made it consistent with our post-construction stormwater manual and how that lays out what should be submitted for the preliminary plan, and then as well as the final drainage plan, which is still included. Then when they're ready to construct, they would submit whatever phase they were working on. Oh, and actually that's a big part of it too. So the concept plan will be the entire area. Say they own a quarter section, they'll conceptually plan where everything will go, and then they'll show their phasing on there. And then when they're ready for each phase, because the preliminary plan is only good for 3 years, they will prelim plan their phase. So then we'll take it section by section, and I think that's more conducive for everybody, where we're not overwhelming, adjacent landowners, you guys, on looking at a whole quarter section at one time. Except we will in the concept plan, but that'll all be conceptually laid out, and you can see what needs to be shown at that phase. And then, so then the construction plans that would come forward, we'd enter into a development agreement with them, and then they have 2 years to install the infrastructure for the phase that they're working on, and then that comes in conjunction with the plat. The plat and development agreement comes back to Plan Commission and Council. So then you can see what was approved for the concept plan, and then whatever they're gonna plat. And sorry, I feel like that was like a earful, so I might have lost you guys.
The general summary, to Brandy's detailed summary there, is that what the development, the task force committee were wanting to do, and that staff and members of that committee agreed with, was trying to figure out how to modify the process to lighten the lift up front for the developers in regards to detailed design, detailed engineering expenses, detailed layouts, and things of that nature. So that's where this concept plan coming forward to the Plan Commission was derived, and that concept plan would still include the general conceptual layouts of all those things, where the streets are going to generally be aligned, where the lots are generally going to be aligned, how the drainage is generally going to be mitigated, and all those things on a conceptual level. And then the next step in the process, on a per phase basis, we would dive deeper. We'd require the developer's engineer to dive deeper on those components that would then be technically designed for construction. And that's where we would have the detailed drainage reports, the detailed street sections, the final lot layout, the final street configurations, and things of that nature that would come at that prelim plan phase on a per phase basis of the overall development. And that's generally what we were trying to accomplish, and to shift the heavy lifting, the heavier expense, a little later in the process than up front at the conceptual end of things. So I don't know if that helps recap Randy's summary a little bit for everybody, but
quick question. So if the Plan Commission approves the concept plan, and we don't necessarily have the details of the street sections, for instance, and that becomes an approval from the engineering department during the preliminary plan phase. You know, what happens if they're proposing something that doesn't meet the design standards for the city?
So as far as the street section goes, the technical thickness of asphalt or concrete paving and the thickness of the base course and the width of the street and things like that, those are all outlined in the engineering design standards. And in the engineering design standards, the form of recourse for appeal is actually through the city engineer. Now, if which is myself, if I were to make a determination that the applicant wasn't in favor of or had an issue with, we generally don't entertain many variances from engineering design standards. I'll say that first and foremost. It's an oddity to grant a variance. It's got to be a really unique circumstance or a special situation. Because our design standards do have minimums, essentially. It's not an exact, it shall be built this way, but more of a, this is the minimum it should be built to. And so it's easy to meet those in most any situation for a developer. And so that's why we don't generally end up having to entertain variances. Of course, that doesn't mean we won't get asked, but if that is presented, it is written in the engineering design standards that they would be entertained on a per case basis by the city engineer. Now, if there were a pressing issue that the city engineer felt, whether it's myself or future city engineer, would feel that you know, there's a concept where we missed the mark on our design standards, those of course would go forward to council, who's adopted the engineering design standards. We'd have a more higher level discussion on the concept behind that regulation, whether it should be amended in the design standards, and proceed in that manner.
Would that include, so if they wanted to use, you know, swales for conveyance of water versus, you know, curb and gutter sewer system, is that part of the consideration?
As far as the considerations for,
What would be approved from the engineering office versus approved through the concept plan?
Well, they would need curb and gutter for a urban section.
But if the city engineer approved a variance from the curb and gutter, no one would know, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm asking where would that approval come from? Because we have had, you know, proposals that wanted to use swales instead of curb and gutter structures. So typically we would have reviewed that at the commission level. And so the question is that part of the concept planning phase, or is that something that is administratively done then with this change?
you know, that level of detail, whether they're showing what you're talking about, Mr. Chairman, is the difference between what's called a rural street section or an urban street section.
Yeah.
And if a rural street section were to be presented, I guess, Brandy, in that concept phase, I would think we could have that as a requirement at that concept level to at least note and show conceptually whether they're presenting rural street sections or urban street sections. That's one way that issue could be addressed.
Could also ask to disclose any variances that are requested at the concept plan level, so that the plan commission knows. And this isn't very different from the way that it's laid out right now. The concept plan has always been part of our ordinance. It's just that went through administratively, and then the heavy detail came to the plan commission. So what's different is still a concept plan, is still a concept, but that comes to you. And then it's done before they've invested all the money in the engineering for the preliminary plan, where they work out the exact details.
Mm-hmm.
And then none of that goes to the council, only the plat. So that's been a question I've received many, many times from council members. When do we get to see this? When do we get to see this? Oh, you don't. You don't. It's all approved by the plan commission at the preliminary plan stage right now. So the heavy lifting is done by the plan commission. So this shifts the heavy lifting to the staff, which takes it out of the public realm. There's only one public hearing. It happens at the concept plan, I'm assuming.
Yep.
Right now, the way it's written, it happens at the preliminary plan, and that's where all the details are known. So you are taking it out of the public eye. You're just approving, instead of approving the nitty-gritty, you're just approving the concept. And the staff will do the nitty-gritty. And so you have to trust the staff, and that's, you know, if, with design standards in place, I think it's fair to ask for disclosure of any variances that are granted, and that could be done at the plating stage, because the way that our flow is, they'd have the public hearing at the Plan Commission for the concept. If it's approved by the Plan Commission, then they get into the engineering, they do the preliminary plan, that's approved by the staff, and then they'd get a plat. And the plat is approved by the council, but they didn't get to see any of the details. Only the staff approved that. So when they're getting a plat approval, we could write this in, that any variances that were granted by the staff are disclosed to the council before the plat is approved. Or those could come to the Plan Commission.
But even when the plat goes to the council, it typically would have a development agreement with it that would kind of disclose street widths and stuff. Doesn't it usually have that information?
No,
in there?
that's usually, I mean, it might, but lately they haven't. I mean, we used to write them that way, 38-foot road with 3 inches of asphalt, and I mean, we can continue to do that if that's what's desired, but that's, if we have a design standard, it would probably just say road in conformance with design standards, and then the construction plan approval is where the staff checks off that they've met all of that. So the question really is, what happens with variances? So how, because those are administratively approved in our design standards right now, and there was not a great deal of discussion about that when the design standards were approved. And I think that the Plan Commission saw the design standards before the council, right? Or did that go straight to council?
That one.
I think it went straight to
Might have
council.
went straight to council as the approving body.
So it's, I mean, I think that you can trust the staff.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable, you know, in general, especially where we do have design standards and where we're gonna fit within those design
Right.
standards. The concern really would be if we're proposing something
A
that,
deviance
yeah.
from the design standards. So if you're asking that that be disclosed, if it's known at the concept plan level,
Yep.
and what kind of road, if you're, you know, the type of road, if it's an urban standard road or a rural section, absolutely, that should be disclosed at the concept plan level, so you know.
Yeah.
And then any variances that they plan to request could be disclosed at the concept level as well.
Yep.
I like that idea too. And then two, also when the plat would come forward, you guys would see the development agreement, even though you don't act on it, the city council does, but you could make comment on it. And then that is where to, if there was a variance, but I like the idea of just upfront having that as a requirement if there's any variance.
And then I guess
requested.
just very clearly spelling out what they are, because if it's just written into the development lot agreement, you know, what the street width is, you don't have right there that direct comparison of what are they proposing and how is it different from the design standard.
Yeah, because currently, like with the last plat that we approved with the development agreement was at River Ridge 7th, and so, like the mayor had said, all the language that I put in there is the portion of Jaden Lane, Lucas Lane, 7th Street Northwest, and Grand Circle included in the plat shall be constructed to city engineering design standards for local residential streets with parking on both sides. And then it goes on, complete with prepared and compacted subgrade base course paved surface and curb and gutter in accordance with the final plans approved by the city engineer. So that would be in conformance with our engineering design standards. And then if they were asking for a variance of some sort, it would be explained in there, and then we would disclose that as staff. And I mean, and like Heath had said too, if it's something that needs to be changed or needs to be added, that will probably come before the council to make that decision before he'd grant a variance.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, to go back to Commissioner Brink's point on the development agreement and what's included in there or not included in there, one of the things we've intentionally done along the lines of the language Brandy just read is more generalize that development agreement language to refer back to a step that's already complete or a step that still needs to be completed. And so the construction plans that we review and approve for any development are really what are driving the final determinations and approvals of those technical details, what the street section looks like. you know, the paving thickness, the sidewalk width, the street width, and the sanitary sewer alignment, and all those things that go into the public improvements. So really, the development agreement referencing the construction plans as approved by the city engineer is what we're trying to get to. Because what we found in the past is we've got plans that may or may not have been formally processed or approved, then we got a development agreement, and sometimes those two things are discrepant with one another, and that's where we run into conflicts. So we're trying to eliminate some of the redundancies and refer to the other steps in the process to ensure that things get carried out appropriately.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, I prefer to see the development agreements written in that way where it specifies that it's to the design standards, because if it's written the other way where it says, you know, 34-foot wide roads and 3-foot wide sidewalks, it don't necessarily know by reading that does it conform to that design standard or not, and what are you approving? So I think that's good.
I guess just to be the, you know, pain in the butt I always am. This is great, Heath, because of the job you do. But what are we opening up to a future city engineer who may not be as dedicated, may have favors to do? Just, we're opening this up for future. So I think that monitoring documenting the variances that we would be allowing is crucial. That this group of people 20 years from now knows, you know, because you're not always going to be in that driver's seat for us, and that's, you know, that we have to look ahead. If we're going to try to make developing easier, which I think we should, we also need to put those safeties in place. You know what I'm saying? So I think having this group of people 20 years from now also still getting those, you know, they did make this change, they allowed this, they allowed that, because I think every parcel that comes in is a unique situation. I mean, I don't think we, you know, they're not all cookie cutters, we get that. And then the other thing would be the consistency, the things we do want to stay consistent throughout the city. You know, is there just certain things that aren't going to be varianced? You know what I'm trying to say? Maybe sidewalk width isn't ever something that's, you know, maybe there are just some constants. That's all. Just throwing that out there, I guess.
Yeah, no, those are great comments, Commissioner, and I appreciate the accolades too, by the way. So, but to that point, you're exactly right. There are certain components of those engineering design standards that are more of a conceptual or a kind of a theory-based, how we want our community to look. You know, do we want to have rural street sections anywhere in this town? If we do, maybe they're only in certain zoning districts. Do we want to uphold a hard, fast minimum street width standard? And anything narrower than that, we've just determined, unless on a special circumstance, you know, that's what we want in this community. So there's some of those that are more of a conceptual-based consideration for variance. The other ones that typically wouldn't come forward are things like where a consultant engineer may redesign a street section so that they want, instead of the minimum of 8 inch concrete paving over 12 inches of base course, they add another inch to the paving and subtract a couple inches from the base course. Or there's technical things like that where engineers can design a street section so that it will still function appropriately, where another engineer, in my capacity in a regulatory sense, could check that off and say, yes, this will still meet the intent of the design standard.
Right, because we wouldn't know the difference. So,
Exactly.
yeah, so we don't want to take your job away from you. I just think that it should be documented so that, you know, it gives that group of people the knowledge, I guess. That's all I'll say. So.
Yep.
So I just, our most recent preliminary plan that we approved was out at Stony Point, and it was just for the location of the road, and that included a rural section. So when that comes to us as a plat, and that plat goes to the council, and council knows that that's a rural section, then don't they under the current process? Or I mean, because wouldn't that be spelled out in the
Not
development
necessarily. It's, once a preliminary plan is approved, it's up to the city engineer whether he does this or not, and I wouldn't recommend that he do it on a place that's controversial, but it does say that the city engineer may administratively plat in conformance with an approved preliminary plan, as long as, you know, within the 3-year where it's still valid, so it wouldn't necessarily, the plat wouldn't necessarily go to the council. Now, if the road was going to be a public road and they didn't want to build that before they platted, like pretty much everybody doesn't want to build it before they plat. They want to promise to build it if you give me a plat. That's our development agreement. So the development agreement has to be approved by the council. But the plat can be administratively approved. So if in that case of Stony Point, they may be administratively platting the plat, but the road construction isn't going to be done before the plat's approved, so that development agreement will come to the council and they would find out in that if they asked. I mean, those development agreements are pretty technical. They're a minimum of 6 pages long, plus they've got attachments, and it's a lot to expect for a layperson to understand.
And I don't mean to, we need to go through all of the technical stuff. I mean, again, that's out of our realm and knowledge, but just in general, we changed a big thing from, curb and gutter to not curb and gutter, on that one.
And you're asking, would that be known publicly?
Yeah, I just thought that ultimately had to get approved by the city council, I guess, was.
Well, and they could not approve the development agreement. That's how it would happen. But if they built that road in advance and asked for approval of the plat administratively, and the city engineer agreed, that would not be seen by the city council ever. That would never be seen again by anybody but the city engineer, theoretically. Now that probably wouldn't happen, but that's like what Rhonda was referring to. If you had a person that was being pressured, there's no public body approving those things. If you can find ways, and it's legal. That's not an illegal thing to do. So what our ordinance says is you have to build the public improvements before you can plat. That's the basic premise. Or you get a promise to build those things later. And if you promise to build it later, that's a development agreement. That has to be approved by the council. But if someone came in and built the roads that the Plan Commission approved, they don't have to go to the council.
If they were, for Stony Point, for example, if they were platting it as right-of-way, or if they were even constructing it as a private street, though, construction plans would have to be approved. Most likely, they're going to have public infrastructure, for sanitary sewer, water, so we'd have to have a development agreement that council would then have to approve. The actual lots themselves are already platted, and so that would just be the access.
To tag on to that point of the rural urban street section, that's one example where I know offhand that our design standards could be buckled down a little bit. Right now, we offer both options of urban street sections, and we give the criteria how they're to be designed and the standards they need to meet. But there's also an option in the engineering design standards to design and construct rural street sections. What I've seen in other communities is the use of those rural street sections are honed into specific zoning districts. So I think that that's one example where if we as a community want to buckle that down a little bit tighter so that it's not as big of a concern to see a rural street section come into an area of town or a certain zoning district that we absolutely know we wouldn't want it. Some examples would be like a rural residential zoning district where you have a minimum 5-acre lots and things like that, where you commonly would see a rural street section with ditches. Or another example that came up recently, of course, out by the lake, if our new CL district were an appropriate district, because most all the streets, a lot of the streets out there are rural street sections, and maybe doesn't, as long as it can be constructed and function. The stormwater conveyance is the biggest impact when you go from one or the other, and you have to simply account for that no matter which design you go with. But I guess what I'm saying is those engineering design standards in our zoning ordinance, we can continue to customize those to suit our community the way we'd like to, and make some of those, the availability of some of those features specific to certain zoning districts.
Where would that restriction come in? Would that be part of the zoning ordinance or part of the design standards?
I could see it either or both. As long as it was spelled out in one or the other, if not both, it makes it all the clearer if it's in both. But
If it was the design standards, the approval mechanism for changes is through the council only.
Correct.
If it's zoning, then it would be through the plan commission first, followed by the city council.
correct.
So our ordinance, and this has been in place for many years, and it really isn't used all that often. We have minor plats, which don't have any infrastructure, and those can be approved administratively. But also, once the preliminary plan is approved by the plan commission, plats, even with public improvements like roads and utilities, can be administratively approved without your approval, without the council approval, with simply just the city engineer's approval. But that's only within the 3-year period that the preliminary plan is valid, and it has to be in compliance with the preliminary plan. So they can't change anything from it. And we don't see that happen very often, but it has happened. And then, I mean, there have been cases where the council then had questions about why was a plat approved. Well, it was administrative, so there was no public review. That's allowed by law. That's not illegal. And we have adopted that process in our ordinances. So that we're not changing a lot. What we're proposing to do is to help a developer to not waste money on the preliminary plan. Just to change it if the plan commission doesn't like it. So we've moved the approval from the preliminary plan up to the concept plan. And pretty much everything else is the same, but your points are very well taken. And
I think
I
it makes
think
a lot
we
of
can
sense.
incorporate those approval of variances, because we've already adopted design standards, and you're gonna assume it's all in compliance with our design standards unless they've disclosed that it is not.
Yeah. I mean, you know, similar to the conditional use or the Board of Adjustment variance process where we very clearly spell out what the, you know, proposed variances are. You know, something like that during the concept phase where if they are going to request a variance, it's just bulleted out what those are. I think it makes sense to bring that into the public hearing. Certainly the board's not going to have a lot of opinion on the highly technical stuff, but some of the other community conceptual stuff is definitely appropriate.
Yep. And then I just wanted to touch on too, the mayor had alluded to the minor plats. So they're allowed only if they meet all of these requirements. So they're pretty hard to accomplish. So a lot of the times it's still having to go, it's not subdivision, or it's not exempt from the subdivision process, which then there would be some public input, plan commission approval, and whatnot.
Sounds good.
All right, so then I think we're gonna have some internal meetings as well with staff, and then potentially, I did put a public notice out that it would be on for action on August 6th. It might be pushed back, whatnot, but I just wanted to at least get your eyes on it so you could digest it and then ask any questions that you have, and then be fully prepared if you have any amendments that you want to make to it. Let me know ahead of time, or we can discuss it during the meeting as well.
Okay. And is this packet here, is this all hosted in today's agenda online?
Yep,
Okay.
yep. And I just printed you guys hard copies because I added it really late. And there's no public hearing on it, so it's not like it had to be 24 hours before. But I thought that would be the best for public too, if they're listening in or hear about it, they can find it online.
Access it online.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
What Brandy and I will do is, in determining whether it goes on the August 6th, is we'll wait and see how our internal discussions go. We'll wait and see what the feedback from the Plan Commission is, and then plan accordingly from there with the timeline.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it just had to be it was a little premature just because you have to meet the 10-day requirement, so we can
And so-
always renotice.
Expectation then from the plan commission to review this and provide feedback directly to you, Brandy, and you'll correlate all that.
Yep, that would be great.
Okay. Any other new business?
None that I have,
Any old business?
none.
Any reason for executive session?
Nope.
We can take a motion for adjournment.
Moved.
Have a motion?
Second.
Second. We'll take a vote for adjournment.
Aletsky,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
Dolly,
Yes?
Spire,
Yes.
Dargits Johnson,
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Yep, thank you.